In this presentation, we will discuss what quantitative research is, examine two types of quantitative research, and look at a case study using this methodology. Quantitative research is a means for testing objective theories by examining the relationship among variables. These variables can be measured, typically on instruments, so that numbered data can be analyzed using statistical procedures. The final written report has a set structure consisting of introduction, literature and theory, methods, results, and discussion, according to Creswell. There are two types of quantitative research that Creswell discusses. Survey design, which provides a quantitative or numeric description of trends, attitudes, or opinions of a population by studying a sample of that population, and experimental design, which serves to test the impact of an intervention on an outcome, controlling for all other factors that might influence that. Both types of research use a sample and then generalize to the population. There are a number of factors that a researcher must consider when deciding to engage in survey design. The researcher must identify the purpose of survey research, indicate why a survey is the preferred type of data collection, indicate whether the survey will be cross-sectional or longitudinal, and specify the form of data collection. Care must also be taken to consider the population and the sample being used in a survey. The researcher must identify the population of the study, whether the sampling design for this population is single-stage or multi-stage, the selection process for individuals, whether the study will involve stratification of the population, and the researcher must indicate the number of people in the sample and the procedures used to compute this number. With regards to instruments, the researcher must identify the instrument being used. If using an existing instrument, the researcher must determine whether the instrument has both reliability and validity. Lastly, the researcher must also field test or pilot test the survey instrument. With regards to variables, care must be taken to avoid the influence of outside variables. It is also possible to find relationships among the variables in any discussion and analysis. According to Creswell, there are 6 steps that are vital to data analysis and interpretation. 1. Report information about the number of respondents who did and did not respond. 2. Discuss how response bias will be determined. 3. Plan to provide a descriptive analysis of data for all independent and dependent variables, making note of means, standard deviation, and range of scores. 4. Note reliability checks for internal consistency of scales. 5. Identify the statistical analysis for testing the major inferential research questions or hypotheses in the proposed study. And 6. Present the results in tables or figures and interpret the results from the statistical test. Engage in statistical significance testing to determine if the results are a pattern or simply chance, and discuss the implications of the results for practice or further research. There are 4 key components in any discussion around the design of an experimental procedure: participants, materials, procedures, and measures. With regards to participants, the researcher must determine and communicate whether the selection process is random or non-random. They must also communicate if the individuals are randomly assigned to groups in the experiment. They must also ensure that participation in any one group does not influence the outcome of the experiment. Lastly, an appropriate sample size must be used. Similar to survey design, independent variables must be identified. Dependent variables, however, must be measured in terms of A. The direction of observed change, B. The amount of this change, and C. The ease with which the participant changes. The researcher should describe the instruments participants complete in the experiment, often filled out before and after the experiment, in order to determine the effect of the treatment or intervention. Validity and reliability of this instrument must be established as well. These questions can be used to construct a procedure for testing the effects of an intervention. What is the intervention and how is it operationalized? What experimental research design will be used? What would a visual model of the design look like? What instrument will be used to measure the outcome in the study? Why was it chosen? Does it have validity and reliability? Is permission needed to use it? What are steps in the procedure? Can it be piloted? And what are potential threats to internal and external validity for the experimental design and procedure? In the analysis and interpretation of results, the researcher must be aware of any threats to the internal or external validity of the experimental procedure. In a final interpretation, the researcher should identify whether a hypothesis or question was supported or refuted. This discussion should also include why or why not the results were significant based on a review of the literature. Lastly, and arguably most importantly, the researcher should discuss the implications of the results for either further study or for practical application to the public, according to Creswell. Berger and Nadarova's research on the Student Orientation to Schools Questionnaire, SOSQ, is an example of survey method design. The multidimensional student-centered assessment tool measures psychosocial facilitators of student engagement. The SOSQ is based in research on the self-system models of motivation and directs student input on perceived supports and barriers for high school completion. It was developed to answer the following research question: to what extent do specific psychosocial facilitators affect student engagement? Literature review found existing research focused on observable behavioral indicators and psychological markers. This showed educators view learning as cognitive, while students view experiences as emotional. The gap in research led to development of the SOSQ, providing assessment of core facilitators of engagement from the student-centered perspective. The purpose is to focus on social and emotional variables related to students' comfort and bond with school, to detect and address issues of engagement in school, identifying potentially at-risk students and increasing awareness in schools. Berger and Nadarova clearly outlined their sample, describing that 2 samples of upper elementary, grade 4, and high school, grade 7 to 9 students were chosen. These participants were selected to capture the transition periods from lower to upper elementary school and from junior high to high school. These transition times to higher grades are times when motivation and engagement are known to decline from previous research. Participant sample was chosen solely on grade level, and all students in each sample class were asked to participate. 2 versions of the SOSQ were created after pilot testing for high school and elementary. Although the content was similar, variations were designed to account for developmental differences. Questions related to safe and caring schools, external and internal resilience, and self-confidence. The high school survey had additional questions on utility of school and extracurricular activities. The SOSQ transformed student subjective experiences about high school environments and learning into quantitative measures by using a 5-point scale to measure participants' responses. Options ranged from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Berger and Nadarova found some surveys collected contained missing values, but determined the extent of missing data was minor. Response bias was addressed by imputing missing values using an algorithm. Exploratory and confirmatory factor analyses were performed to ensure items were consistent and reliable with intended measurement structures. Correlational analysis demonstrated acceptable internal consistency, demonstrating moderate to strong intercorrelation and sufficient effect size. While results were consistent, differences between age groups were for consideration in future research. Data from the SOSQ survey can be used to identify signs of disaffection and help students develop more positive orientations to school. This can support school improvement initiatives, leading to new research on effective dynamics in educational contexts and analysis of existing research to improve practice. Recommendations for follow-up research focus on how responses identify potential at-risk students. Future research should evaluate strategies to improve student engagement and prevent dropout. The SOSQ is designed for use in large-scale cohort applications. Permission and consent are necessary, as participants must fully understand the survey's purpose. Consideration must be given to administration of the survey and students' relationship to the administrator. If students feel uncomfortable, they may be motivated to present themselves in socially desirable ways. Also, in dealing with student populations, researchers need to be aware of students' vulnerability. Students must be protected from negative effects, and results should be kept confidential unless consent is given. Data-driven, objective, and scientific quantitative research focuses on generalizable tendencies, relationships, and variances. Scores are tested for validity and reliability to lead to meaningful interpretations. Experimental or survey design are both acceptable designs in educational research and are chosen based on the purpose of the study. As seen in the survey design exemplar, quantitative research data, when it demonstrates a plausible correlation, leads to compelling interpretations and further research questions. When faced with a compelling inquiry problem, a prospective researcher chooses quantitative design when looking for generalizations and relationships. Purpose is central to the design, and whether survey or experimental, a researcher must choose methods of data collection that fit the purpose. Data must undergo statistical analysis, leading to meaningful interpretations to drive for future research. While establishing valid and reliable results is a challenge, the result is a meaningful contribution to the